All right, so my second topic and reason, why I think regenerative agriculture can help in the, greater aspect of pulling our society in the direction we desperately want it to go is ecology. And this is one, it makes perfect sense, right? If you think about it, because of the promise of regenerative agriculture is to work in conjunction with the natural cycles of Mother Nature and steward mutually beneficial relationships between the organisms that we are existing with in order to produce food for humanity. Um, so the entire fundamental idea is to improve the ecology with this pursuit. So when we talk about conventional agriculture and um, how it kind of impacts the world negatively, monoculture farming is a major aspect of that because they're just inherently brittle and fragile and destructive, right? So because you're depending so much on the production of a single crop, um, you don't have a resilient system. And there's moments in history we can go back to and look at to see how things like that played out in a very devastating way for people. Like a big example of that would be the Irish potato famine back in the, I think, 1800s. And that was basically happened because that was the only crop they were growing, and it wasn't native to Ireland either. And they were creating a monoculture to maximize the production of that one crop over everything else um, in an unnatural way. And then when that crop failed, um, there was thousands of deaths, if not millions of deaths, as a result of that from starvation because all of their eggs were in one basket, right? And so you can expand this idea out and see how it impacts things not only culturally, when we have one dominant culture that seeks to dominate every other culture to its own ends, but when we apply that within nature, it makes perfect sense why we see the same result, right? Because that's not how nature is meant to work. It's meant to work in cooperative, mutually beneficial relationships across a wide array of plants and fungi and microbes and animals all existing together, um, in a mutually positive way. So there's kind of like three major principles of regenerative agriculture that specifically impact ecology in a positive way. And some people say there's five. I think that a couple of them are kind of the same thing. So I just like to narrow it down to three. But basically, limiting the disturbance of the soil as much as possible. So massively reducing the amount of tillage that we do um, with huge tractors and machinery ripping up and tearing up the land every single year. So limiting that, that's one. Number two is increasing diversity. So not only more plants and more rotations every year, but also bring on animals and fungi and microbes. So a multitude of different kingdoms of living organisms living together as intended by nature on the same piece of land and stewarding them in a productive way to produce food. And the third one is keeping the soil covered at all times, right? So a lot of times that we see in large scale corn, soy, wheat farming is that they grow just that crop every year on a field, and that growing season may only be 5 or so months out of the year, 5 to 6 months out of the entire calendar. And so that means the other half of the year, that soil is just left completely uncovered in a lot of times. And one of the worst places I've ever saw this was when I used to live in Minnesota. And they would do tillage, and they have an even shorter growing season there. So it's more like 7 months that you have nothing on the field. And they would take out their corn or soy crop, do tillage, and then the entire winter, which is very long in Minnesota, um, it's just bare ground. And you would drive along the county roads and see just like 3-4 foot tall piles of topsoil laying in the side ditches of the road, because in the prairies of Minnesota, when you have those cold winter winds blow through, it just picked up the soil and deposited it in the road side. And it's horrible to see, because every time that happens, I mean, you're just losing decades of valuable topsoil that takes a long time to recover, right? We saw this recently, I think maybe last year. There was a massive dust storm in Chicago, and they called it a dust storm, which is like super misleading. It's a soil storm, right? Like that dust isn't like coming off of your piece of furniture in your house that you haven't dusted. It's literally the soil from the surrounding farmed areas outside of the Chicago metro area that have all been grown in this conventional paradigm for so many decades. It was basically like a mini dust bowl happening in Chicago, where there's like no visibility because the winds were so bad, just ripping the topsoil off the top of the land and filling the streets and the air. And it's terrible to breathe, very destructive, and you're just losing the most valuable resource that we have in agriculture. Soil health and good soil is the fundamental of everything that we do in agriculture and farming. It all starts with that. And really, this speaks to the idea that soil health is the foundation of the health of really like all organisms downstream, right? So the microbes that live in the soil, the fungi that grow on the soil, the plants that grow on it, the animals that eat those plants and fungi and each other, that roam the land, all of them depend on the soil being healthy first, so that way all of the organisms throughout the food chain have optimal nutrition, and we see that recycled back into the soil then once organisms die and build soil, right? So if you have poor quality soil, as we do now in the US at scale, really, we've done not irreversible damage, because Mother Nature is just incredibly resilient, and I truly believe like there's basically nothing humans could do, given it enough time to like destroy the planet. Mother Nature will always come back. So we haven't done irreversible damage, but we have done significant damage that needs to be undone, right? If we want to continue surviving, right? Nature could survive without us. But if we want to continue surviving as a species, we do have to reverse the damage we're doing. So you can really see how the parallels between the current situation we find ourselves in America and in the greater Western world, with capitalism running roughshod over every society for decades now, and the maximization of profit seeking over everything, the maximization of personal gain over everything. You can see that connection very inherently with agriculture, and the way that we practice agriculture in the conventional system mirrors that same societal idea that has taken over completely. And what regenerative agriculture seeks to do is to undo that and reframe our worldview in such a way that, rather than to seek competition and the maximization of a single species or a single plant or crop to the detriment of everything else, it seeks to steward those relationships between organisms and diversify the landscape and ecology. And the biggest result you can see from this is every single year that you practice regenerative agriculture, applying the principles in the real way, not just in the marketing way, it's very obvious and apparent the improvement year over year over year that you operate in your soil function, in the health of the plants and animals growing on that soil, in the health of the humans stewarding the land and the food that it creates for humanity. This is all measurable. There's plenty of studies and stuff you can read that go into the differences at a technical level of fats and nutrition and macronutrients and micronutrients as well, when we compare true regenerative like meat, dairy, and vegetable products to their conventional counterparts, right? And I would say that this also, my vision for the future here is that if we apply those kind of same principles to the rest of society and maximize cooperation and diversification and input from everyone and steward mutually beneficial relationships between people through our economic systems and government systems and business systems, that we would see the positive impact of that compound year over year that we do it, in a more peaceful and just and fair world, where each person, has the freedom to pursue the things they want to pursue, and not feel like they're going to be left behind. So that's, a huge reason to me why I see these as parallel pursuits, right? Even though they might seem unrelated, is that if we apply these same principles of regenerative ag, I think there's no doubt we would see massive positive impact every year that we implement it in all aspects of society downstream of just the food system.